right, I got the notes right here in my hand. And I got Luke, cool hand Luke. Has anyone ever called you that?
Just now.
Oh, you're welcome.
I'm sure it has happened before. Luke Skywalker was probably the more common thing growing up there.
What even is cool hand Luke?
Is now something from like the 1800s Wild West or something. Like somebody, I can imagine them having to pull the guns out of the holster. Yeah, we're
it's
already
definitely Western.
Yeah, Western, isn't it? Yeah, I like how we're already off track.
No, we're not. Remember, we have cold opens. But you know what? Speaking of cold opens, I'd like to warm it up a little bit and say that for the first time ever, I looked at downloads because Anne-Marie sent them to me last night. And we've had over 16,500 downloads in the last month. And that really hit for me because I was like, oh shit, they're actually listening.
Really listening.
So if you've been a listener to this podcast, first of all, I'm overwhelmed with gratitude. And second of all, if you find time in your day and you want to support us in any way, go ahead and leave a review or hit the stars. Those things help. Luke and I are in a competition with one another now because there's a bunch of rankings among podcasts, which I didn't know about. And we were on the same list.
Yeah. I was ahead of you as well.
At one point.
Yeah. That.
I love it. Healthy competition.
Interestingly enough, yours has only gone above mine since I've been appearing on your podcast.
Oh, well, that's only, yeah, what? You're going to claim that?
I was going to say, I joined the team also.
Yeah.
Oh, so. Well, I suppose there was that as well.
I think that helped a little.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you definitely helped that actually come to be because I wasn't even doing the podcast regularly until Anne-Marie came along. I basically knew that I needed accountability. So I was like, might as well pay for it. Barely.
Literally, yeah. Barely and literally. Both true.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and get started. Luke, go ahead and tell us, what's the title of this podcast, you guys? Learning to Love Again When Trust Breaks, But Hearts Don't?
You got it. I think when someone tells you that they love you, whether that's romantic, platonic, or just an admiration from a distance, it comes with layers of implied meaning. On the one hand, you feel, or it can feel like validation. You're seen, you're appreciated, maybe you're even admired. But on the other hand, it can feel like a kind of pressure, especially when it's just a one-way street. Love often comes with expectations, even if they're unintentional. The person saying, I love you, may not actually want anything, but it's easy to feel like you now have to live up to a certain, ideal. What if you disappoint them? What if you don't measure up to the way that you did today? It's a lot to carry. For people who naturally care about others, it's really hard to not feel responsible for their emotions, even if logically that their feelings are about their own thoughts. It can still feel like you owe them a return on their emotional investment. Because unlike mutual relationships where love is exchanged, admiration or love from a group or audience can be balanced. You give value through your work, but you can't possibly reciprocate that level of personal connection to each individual. And this imbalance can feel overwhelming. Now, I read that out as something that you and I discussed quite recently, and I made some notes afterwards and thought it was really quite useful. It could be quite useful as a topic of conversation for today. So that's what we're going to do, Chelsea.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to give the audience some context as far as what you and I were talking about?
So you were sharing how, since you've been on this mission, on this journey, you have received, or you perceive receiving lots and lots of love and admiration from the people who support you, the people in the community, the people who are listening to this podcast, and the people who've reached out even in the early days through TikTok and all the other the media formats in which that they can. And you are one individual human being, and your capacity to receive said love was something that you felt, uneasy.
I just didn't have enough to reciprocate. I think what I had shared with you in that conversation was it feels overwhelming to have this amount of expression of love and support when it isn't possible for me to reciprocate individually every single time. And then we started to dovetail into the conversation about how the fear of falling in love manifests itself after the experience of an affair. And that was definitely a very alive and well fear for me back in the day. But also even today, I experience that fear. And it's not necessarily falling in love, but it's an ability to reciprocate the love that is expressed.
Yeah, I do. And I think it's interesting that this love, in the way that you're talking about it, as though it almost has to be reciprocal.
Yeah, like there's an imbalance that I need to balance out in some way by like overperforming or trying really hard to make sure that everybody knows how grateful I am for their support and their love and their time and their energy and their effort. I mean, even you two being here today, I feel like there isn't enough money, there isn't enough words, there isn't enough to make the score even, make the output even.
And obviously, I can't speak for everybody that you're referring to, of course, but I can speak for myself. And the admiration, the love, the willingness to be here has nothing to do with your capacity to reciprocate that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's rad.
Just thinking about what that means in the context of, when you do feel like you're delving into love again after you perceived as a relationship with love has broken down and gone a different way for whatever reason. And now you're entering back into the world of rebuilding a relationship, whatever that looks like, whether that be with your AP, with whoever, or even just yourself.
Yeah, I think it's like also, as this relates to our audience, like why they're listening to us as far as infidelity and betrayal and all of that and all it entails goes, is being able to accept love after you've done something or experienced something with someone that you love that was so disorienting, and then becoming fearful of receiving love or even expressing love, and it being this way to isolate yourself where as long as I don't invest care, then I can't be hurt again type thing. And I'd love to know, Luke, how did you regain the courage to express love post your experience of infidelity?
I mean, it was frightening, I think, to begin with, at least. The idea, I think probably earlier rather than later, in the sense that when I went through my own situation, I really wanted to save my marriage. I wanted to use the love that I felt at that point for my wife as a fuel to try and rebuild and make it work. And of course, as I've shared before, that wasn't really an option for me. I didn't have the ability to be able to see that through in the moment. And that made all the love that I had to give like it had nowhere to go. That's what it felt like. It felt like it was taken away. Like it felt like, so in a way, opposite to what we were talking about before. Almost as like you can't find enough love to give all of the people or all the things. And I was like, I had all of this love and I couldn't have it received.
Oh my God, you're basically describing the manifestation of grief. There's this one quote that I love, and I'm going to bring it up right now because I think it falls in line exactly with what we're talking about. And I know I've shared this with a few people, but this is what it says. I actually started my mom's eulogy off with it. And it says, grief is really just love. It's all the love you want to give, but cannot. All that unspent love gathers up in the corners of your eyes, the lump in your throat, and in that hollow part of your chest. Grief is just love with no place to go. And so what you're describing, the way that my mind interprets it, is that force of forfeiting what you thought what was and what will be, and what is that introductory process into grief, and actively grieving with intention, and how uncomfortable it is. But yeah, it totally just hit me that that's exactly what you're describing, is you getting to a place where you were open to grief that allowed you to love again.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm not sure I'd ever quite thought of it that way, but I can really see it And I think the reason I didn't, or maybe the reason I didn't think of it quite that way, is because at the time, and maybe even to some extent now when I reflect back, I felt grief. Like I remember going through the motions of what grief sort of looked like, or what I imagined it to look like. I was grieving the loss of my identity. I was grieving the loss of the relationship, the marriage, everything that represented, rather than necessarily grieving the loss of my wife specifically. The reason I separate that out is because when I think about the love that at the time, I felt like I had all that love to give and it couldn't be received. And what I was telling myself in that moment was that because it wasn't being received, then I couldn't really feel it. Like I was telling myself that I wasn't allowed to feel it if there was no recipient. Of course, I know that now to be absolute rubbish. I get to love who the hell I want, and there is sod all they can do about it. And
that's what you said to me. Get to love you however much they want, and you don't get to do shit about it. And I was like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Oh, so Chelsea, I want to ask you, what was your experience in the grieving process as someone who had also been on the other side as
the one who made the choice to exit the relationship and the intentional choice of grieving? Go ahead.
I was going to say, did you struggle allowing yourself to grieve because of the role that you played?
Oh, absolutely. Like, I'll say that the most painful part of the experience was the refusal to grieve, because I thought that I shouldn't feel any sadness over the loss because it was my choice anyways. But that discounted the reality of I was going to have to go through that fire and walk through it. And it was actually like this really solid moment in my mind. I'll never forget it. It was a girlfriend of mine, and she was randomly talking about her own relationship. And she had said, yeah, I was in my new relationship with my soon-to-be husband, but I realized I couldn't fully be present in that relationship until I grieved these other relationships that had existed prior. There wasn't any infidelity in her story, but when she said that, I was like, oh my God, that's totally what's holding me up here as far as being fully present inside of the present relationship that I'm in. I haven't looked back at the past or really consulted myself in how do I feel about the loss that I have just experienced. And then once I gave myself the freedom to grieve, it was like that tug of war internally, as far as it being like, this hurts. I don't know what to do with this hurt. And thinking that the only choice is to go back to them or to talk to them about it. There was another option entirely, and it was to allow myself to feel honestly about that loss, because it wasn't, I know that some people have this idea that there was like animosity or a troubled ending. When I look back at the relationship that I had and the ending, I see it very much in a holistic sense, in that I had a marriage. I had a first marriage, and it was a good marriage. And then I walked away. That's it. There wasn't some radical intention to hurt each other or anything that we were trying to create havoc in each other's lives. There were just two individuals who were ill-equipped for a long-term relationship that lasted longer than it did. And whether I can come to terms with that reality and be like, you know what, it was pretty good. I loved the experience of that relationship. That doesn't mean that I have to stay inside of it, though, because something about that relationship didn't fit me. And so me walking away, I felt, was a way more compassionate response, not just to me and what I wanted for my future, but also him. I didn't need to stay there and pretend anymore. I didn't need to pretend that I was somebody that I wasn't, or that I wanted things that I wanted in the past that I no longer wanted in my future. I had the freedom and the ability to change my mind. And that was okay, not just with everyone around me, but that was okay with me too. You know?
I think when we traverse from one relationship to another in a very short space of time, regardless of the context, first of all, it's very normal to leave one relationship believing that another relationship is going to be better in some way. And then, of course, what often happens is the same patterns emerge. That's really quite a common behavioral trait in relationships. But aside from that, there is also this element that when there's only a very short time period between one relationship coming to an end and another one beginning, or even if there's an overlap, that you haven't given yourself any space to grieve the first.
So I think, and you're probably not going to listen, there's no ideal timeline. And when we start to trip ourselves up with, oh, I haven't taken enough time to be alone. Oh, I haven't taken enough space to distance myself from this relationship. I need to go into this place of isolation. I think respecting the individual and their journey is they know what's going to suit them best. Yes, I moved straight from a marriage into a committed relationship with somebody else. The relationship that I moved into, though, did allow me the space to be an individual who had the opportunity to grieve, who had the opportunity to declare space for myself and not get enmeshed with the other person. I truly believe that one of my favorite things about my relationship with Stan is how much of an individual I became, even inside the relationship with Stan. And so there being this prescriptive measure of, oh, and then you need to go into a period, 1 year, no contact and don't talk to anybody. I just think that once
that's not, I don't think that's really what I'm saying.
Sorry.
What I mean is, I don't mean that there necessarily needs to be a gap between one relationship and another. I don't think that's necessary. I think that it is necessary to have the space, whether that be in a future relationship or not, to grieve the first. And often a couple, maybe often it's not, no, maybe it is often, that space isn't allowed. It isn't accepted.
Oh, totally.
So there's no space. There's no space to grieve.
Yes.
So this is not about. It's the awareness around that. I'm not really interested in whether there is some predetermined. Oh well, you should take 6 months. You should take 2 years. You should do this. No, I'm whatever. Not bothered about that.
Or
what I'm interested in, but I do believe that it needs to happen.
What's interesting about you? Yeah, absolutely. What's interesting about you saying this though is, some people choose not to grieve it because they feel that their new partner is threatened, or the new partner is, if you're grieving this person, then you really don't love me, type of thing. And I think that's a really self-important way to make it all about you. Like this person going through the motions of letting go of something that was really important to them for 20 years, 30 years, 3 years, whatever it was, is really a way to respect your partner and being an individual and allowing them that space. Because when you do allow them that space, they show up way more, I'll say, vibrantly, and being able to appreciate that their loss is more about them than it is about what they feel for you is really important. And it's really hard, I think, for people to wrap themselves around that, because they immediately think it's an either or option. And like, how could you be sad about losing her when you gained me? And that's like a false dilemma, because it's so fluid. Like the human experience, people come in and out of our lives. The timing of relationships isn't always up to us. Yeah, you can plan to have a husband, but it's not always going to be the experience that you would plan to have. And so when the plan fails, then what?
Yeah. And that applies to way more than just getting married and relationships. Totally. That's every aspect of life.
And one last thing I'd like to touch on with the grief is that if you find yourself in the situation where you're trying to work on the marriage, I think all too often the go-to response is to forget about the affair and focus on the primary relationship. And if your primary relationship can't handle allowing space for grief of the old relationship and for the person who experienced the extramarital affair, then you're going to really struggle to actually achieve healing and have a healthy relationship.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Because immediately, don't people who, I definitely had the inclination of, once I had made the choice to step outside the marriage, I was like, this isn't real. this isn't happening. I was working so hard to invalidate the experience because I was in disbelief over how it affected the life I had built already. There was this, what do they call it? Flight or fight response.
Fight or flight,
right?
yeah.
Flight, fight, freeze.
Yep.
I was definitely like, which one do I choose? Which one do I choose?
I didn't realize you got a choice.
Oh, yeah, I do. You absolutely do, I think. But yeah, I remember it being is this something we just sweep under the rug and move past? Because when I was actively assessing whether to reconcile with my ex, it was, do I just put it under the rug? And I mean, he chose to forgive me on the spot. And so now what do? Do I continue forging the path that I had planned, or do I abandon that path and go into this direction that feels really pulling?
It's interesting.
Go ahead.
Sorry,
I was going to say 0 out of 10 recommend the rug.
Yeah.
The rug. 0 out of 10.
0 out of 10. Agreed. Because that's something that I was aware of for definite. Like even though I wanted to save my marriage and I wanted to work towards that, and I had no idea really what that looked like, I was absolutely aware that if she were to commit to this path, that she would need the space to grieve that letting go of whatever that looked like. And I didn't want to predict that, but I knew that was something that would have been required. I have no idea what that would have actually been like for me to have gone through had it have happened.
One of the things that really sticks out to me about your story, Luke, is yes, you guys reconciled. You reconciled in time, and you gave her physical distance. I remember it being really important to my ex that I stay right there so he could take care of me as I grieve, type thing. And that being really uncomfortable for me. I did not want his presence while I was being sad over something that also impacted him, but in a profoundly different way. And when I talk to clients who are in the throes of it, the way that they abandon the need to grieve is they say, but I have to put on a happy face in front of all these people. I'm at home and I'm heartbroken because I just lost somebody that I felt I truly loved. And now I'm in front of all of these people and I don't want them to think that I'm sad because of their presence. So then they just put it under the rug. They just swallow it whole. And I think that when you attempt to swallow your grief like that or pretend it doesn't exist, it perpetuates the suffering and the despair that you feel internally.
Yeah, for definite. And I think that's why I postfix that with, yes, at the time I acknowledged that a grieving process would be required, but I was under no illusion that actually that might have also been extremely difficult to have actually facilitated and to have acted out. I mean, I don't know because I witness it in the people I work with, but in terms of my own personal experience, I can never truly know because you're right. There was a space that became, we did separate, we did divorce, and we spent the next few years apart. So there really was that space to be able for her to fully grieve that experience and grieve the marriage at the end of the day, because that also hadn't been done up until that point. And it also allowed me to grieve the loss of her, the change of circumstances, and of course this identity thing, which was, I know I keep bringing that up, but that was a really major thing for me at the time. And I can only note that if it was such a major thing for me, it's very likely a major thing for lots of other people too, in terms of how we see ourselves in relationships.
I think it's so interesting because I love that we're centering on grief, because I think that grief is ultimately what brought me to exploring this idea. And the way that I see it is that we don't grieve people, we grieve a past experience, and we grieve future plans that we had invested our hearts into. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately, if you're going to go through this self-development exercise, this catalyst that the experience of an affair can bring to your life, you're ultimately grieving a past version of yourself. You're grieving past behaviors, past patterns, past belief systems, past value systems, really getting into the trenches of assessing all of it and determining what fits me now. These are the things that I brought over from 20 years ago. Are they still relevant to me this day, in this moment? And getting really present with that and assessing it.
And knowing that in itself is still fluid. Even if you sit down today and you establish all those things, that doesn't mean that's how it has to be for the rest of time. It's like an ongoing. It can sometimes seem overwhelming, particularly when you don't feel like you've got your foot on solid ground. But in many ways, it's just so freeing, because it means you constantly get to do what you want, and you get to change your perception. And the world around you doesn't have to change to match it. Like, you can change. And I think spotting that change in people and that realization in people is, it's a pleasure to witness. And it was certainly a wonderful thing to go through.
In it. Hearing people talk out loud about their understanding of their value and belief system is really interesting. And then also going into it with them of assessing in the past, what moments, where did you feel most aligned with the things that you speak of? And what was that circumstance that you were in? And what was your daily routine like? And getting back to basics. I think it's definitely a humbling experience, that's for sure.
If you are the other woman in your relationship and you love this podcast, you would love the Other Women community. The Other Women community is a membership program designed to help other women just like you reclaim their relationship with themselves and heal from their affair. We provide a safe and supportive environment for you to open up and talk about your experiences. We give you the tools and resources you need to grow into an authentic, empowered individual. If you're ready to take the next step in your healing journey, head on over to theotherwomanandthewife.com/community to learn more about the membership and all it has to offer.
Through this experience of grief and the different ways that we can feel, or the different things that can lead us to feeling grief, how do you make that next step and detach? Well, no, actually, I'm not even saying. Do you attach the feeling of grief with a lack of love, or thinking about this topic that we started with, this idea of learning to love again? Grief is something that's going to hold us back. It's going to protect us in some way. It doesn't feel very nice, and it feels very destabilizing and frightening.
I think that expressing grief is one of the most freeing experiences I've ever allowed myself. I don't see grief as a negative or anything like that. I think it is the revelation of the abundance of love that you have within, and how important relationships are to your individual experience. As someone who has gone through the throes of grief in a myriad of ways, I liken it to intentionally going into a gratitude process of what was, and then intentionally going into a letting go process of what will never be. And so as it relates to me grieving the first marriage that I had, I really had to go into what was it about that experience that I was supremely grateful for? What was it about not just the partner, but my experience in life at that moment? Like, it wasn't just about my marriage. It was about my employer. It was about the colleagues that I had at that point in time, the amount of travel I was doing in the world. It felt like I was leaving all of that behind in pursuit of something completely different. And that was very frightening. It was like rug being pulled out from underneath you type thing, in combination with looking at all of the dreams that I had spent time inside of myself planning for. We had plans for kids, but the letting go of the future dreams, right? Like the future fantasies, was there was investment there. There was investment of myself in those moments, because I had actively put myself into those dreams. Having children together.
Okay, well, I was thinking about how your situation, and you were able to then go into a relationship where you felt you had the space to be able to grieve, and you felt supported, and you were able to do that in your own sense of identity and take responsibility for yourself in that moment. What do you say to people who maybe don't find themselves in such a an easy position, whereby they do feel
where
like
their
there was
autonomy is really respected and
yeah,
valued by their partners.
where it's not respected and valued, where it's
where they want it and it doesn't exist.
Yes, that.
You are the master of your domain. I remember sending Anne-Marie a video one time where she had sent me a note about an experience that she had where she was really shook. And she was in a public space, but there was a presence in that public space that made her really rattled. And I had told her, I said, I whipped out my camera and I basically did a TikTok for her on the fly. And I was like, here's the deal, Anne-Marie. What you do is you take your presence out of the situation. And I don't mean by removing yourself mentally from what is at play. What I mean is getting up, walking away. You do not have to argue with someone that you are important. You do not have to tell somebody that the way that they're acting is affecting you. You go in defense of your peace and you precisely remove your presence from a presence that is altering your experience in a negative way. Because I think that for the most part, the people that choose to opt into the support services that we offer are passive. They are the passive types of people, and they're not doing it on purpose. They're doing it in a sense to preserve peace, but the peace that they're preserving is not their own. So there's this sacrifice of personal peace in favor of peace for the entire world. And that's not, I think peace for the entire world is a radical idea. I'd love for it to come to be, but that would require every individual having peace within themselves for that to come to be. So
I think it'd be a bit dull as well. If I'm honest.
Would it?
Yeah, I do. I think we like novelty. Like as a species, I think we like novelty. I think you do. If you were to create the perfect environment for yourself and sit in that environment, and it would be amazing to begin with, and it would feel wonderful. And I remember, I don't want to take responsibility for somebody else's words. I can't remember who said it, to be honest, but I remember hearing this idea that if everything was perfect in that way, and this almost like utopian world, then people would just start smashing shit up just for something to do. Because
we need contrast.
Yeah, we need contrast. And it's often when I'm working with people, we're exploring like what emotions that they actually want to feel rather than the ones that they feel victim to. And it's amazing how often the feeling of content comes up. And I always found that really interesting, because it's like, I understand the feeling of content, and I've definitely experienced the feeling of content many times in my life, but it's extremely short-lived. And it's that content is that moment when you get on holiday and you sit down and you relax and you've got the book beside you, and maybe you've got your drink and you're the sun, and you just fully exhale. That's like a moment of complete content, complete calm. But that you couldn't stay like that forever. And also it doesn't lead to anything. It's not an emotion that drives any action. If anything, it's an emotion that drives inaction. And that's great for a period of time, but it's not something that I would necessarily choose to desire of all the emotions. Yeah, it's really interesting.
So as you bring that up, it made me think of the part that I think the referral that I found was basically when you're having a panic attack when things feel too good, which I think is very common after infidelity. And it is a trauma response, obviously. But what advice would you give to somebody who has extricated themselves, they're in a healthier relationship and they're having these panic attacks around feeling too good?
Like the too good to be true?
Yeah. Or they're unable to absorb it because they don't think that they deserve it. And so they're fighting the good that's like entering.
God, it's so interesting that you use that word deserve, because I think about this all the time. I don't like the word deserve because it works off of something that isn't true to me. And I always think about worthiness instead. Am I operating in a way where I am worthy of the gifts that have come around me? Am I showing up in my life in a way where I am worthy of the affection, the attention, the kindness that so easily flows my way, rather than it being I deserve this. But when you're in that place of I'm undeserving of what is in front of me, I think that what's really at play is you don't know how to receive and how to practice gratitude and how to really open yourself up, open your heart up really to receiving what is already yours. So those moments of, waiting for the other shoe to drop, which I encounter regularly, waiting for the other shoe to drop and waiting for the bomb to drop is really just, like you said, it's a trauma response. You're bringing the past into the present. And I tell my kids this all the time. Don't bring the past into the present. You'll ruin it. You'll ruin the gift. And so letting the past be in the past and realizing that your current place isn't defined by what happened then, and trying to figure out like what went wrong then, is you actively choosing to live in the past. And if you're in the past, you're not really present in your life. And being able to practice presence, I think, is really where it's at. Who am I? Where am I? What am I doing? That whole thing. I think that exercise is one of the most helpful exercises that Kevin taught me, where if there's a moment where you're experiencing panic, just taking a second and saying, okay, I'm Chelsea. I'm recording a podcast with Luke and Anne Marie, and I am speaking a message that hasn't been spoken before to an audience that has been underserved. I'm here, rather than it being this constant anticipation of what will be or what was. I hope that helps. Luke, what do you say?
Yeah, just starting off from, I know it was more Chelsea's grabbing of the word deserve, but I think of that in the context that when we hear the word deserve, it's almost like it's something that needs to be earned. Like it's like a transactional element. Like you only deserve something if you are worthy of something, i.e. you've earned something, you've done something good enough to be rewarded in form of something that you deserve, which I don't think is very helpful. So yeah, I would equally draw attention to that. And then in the context of the response, the emotional response that you experience and that you might be experiencing, and whether that be in a positive or a negative sense, is the presence is huge. And that quick tool that you mentioned there, that who am I, where am I, what am I doing, really useful in just grounding yourself in the moment, particularly if you're in a situation where you don't feel like you've got much control and there's a lot of stuff going on around you. That can be a really effective way to just draw that back to close. But then as a sort of a more longer term thing, just really paying attention to what's actually going on inside you and becoming much more familiar with the experience that you're having, rather than trying to solve it, rather than trying to fix the problem, because that's the temptation, is there's something going wrong, therefore I must need to do X, Y, and Z to fix it. And that it rarely helps, if ever. Whereas if you weren't afraid of the experience, then it makes the experience less dangerous, scary, less daunting. Yeah. It actually actively, you become comfortable with discomfort. And okay, a trauma response is a little bit different to just a feeling of sadness or hurt or shock, a momentary thing, because it is triggered from something very deep. But becoming comfortable with it when it happens makes it less frightening. And that allows you then to just take that next step in a direction of, hey, this is something that I can take control of. It's something that I can handle. And then just finally touching on the sense of worthiness, I think I would potentially put it that we are all 100% worthy, even if that sounds a bit cliche or whatever. I think it's true. I think we're all completely worthy. And really, it's just either our or the other person's capacity to see our worth. So it's not the worthiness of the individual, it's just the people's capacity to see it that impacts it. But that does include us too. Sometimes we don't see our own worth.
Yeah, totally.
And this episode is definitely going to have a part 2 where we will be going into relearning trust. After you grieve, after you start to process, we'll be continuing this conversation in a part 2 with the next steps of learning how to trust again. So I don't know where we want to find an end to this one, but that is definitely what I'm going to be doing with this episode.
Well, I feel like you just did. I feel like you just did.
Yeah, I think that would work as well.
I really enjoyed this. I don't know if it's because I'm in my bedroom. I usually enjoy time in my bedroom, or I'm outside of that dark hole that I was in. But I really did enjoy this conversation. How do you feel about it, Luke?
It was really good. And I know that no amount of love that I send your way, Anne-Marie, will take what you're feeling away. I still send it. There's nothing you can do about it.
Who, me?
No, Anne-Marie.
Oh, I get it. We're playing favorites here.
Well, when I saw this topic, I was like, wow, hot seat, as I'm like in the throes of it.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm just going to go dig around and root in this wound that's actively open right now.
You're so brave. I love it.
I'm not wrapping my head around this, and it's really frightening, okay? I am not wrapping my head around this at all. Hold on, let me look at the topic really quick, because when I think of your life, Anne-Marie, I see you, period. I don't really see the other players that are in your life. And I see you lighting up and learning new things and opening yourself up to experience. I mean, you came out to California in December to go hang out with me. And that was a really cool experience, because I had only known you on the other side of the screen for so long. And I think that's one way to get to know a person. But then, oh my God, you were so cute though. You were like, you came over, we freaking hung out, we danced. And so thinking about you going into other romantic relationships, I'm like, that ain't on the fucking table right now. If I had my choice, I would be like, Anne-Marie's just hanging out with me.
It's definitely one of those things where I've become very aware of what I want. As there's characters, everybody around me seems to want to give me all this love. And I'm just like, I can accept the love, but my reciprocation level right now is, and not everybody's been liking that response of, listen, here's how much I am able to expend right now. And I know some people think I'm just very jaded. And I was like, I'm in it. I'm like still processing it.
You're like, I'm not jaded. I'm just don't have the bandwidth or the capacity to respond in the way that you want me to at this point in time.
And in the past, knowing how they want me to respond, the desire to respond that way would have crippled me.
Yeah.
And I'm finally reaching a point now where I see it. And then I'm also reading the let them theory. And I'm like, let them, let me.
Oh, I love that. Well, as always, I enjoyed conversation with you guys, and I hope our listeners enjoyed hearing our conversation. And just another call to action. We've had a negative wave of attention, and this negative wave of attention, all of these people came in and did 1-star reviews. I don't even think they listened to the podcast, to be honest, but their prerogative. But yeah, if anybody wants to spend some time supporting us, that's one way that you can. And
if anybody wants to, and if anybody wants to come and support my podcast, they can do that too, because I want to get back above Chelsea.
Oh no, never.
Let's do this. Let's do the plug now, Luke. Plug the podcast.
Yeah, go ahead.
After the
What
Affair
is your
podcast. The After the Affair podcast, where you get everything you can possibly want to know if you've experienced infidelity in your life.
Also, I will say that the way you show up on that podcast is different than the way that you show up in this podcast.
True. It is. It's a different format. Yeah, and that's why I love it too as well. I love it too.
Mm-hmm. And I love that our audience is like, it's not that it's merging or anything like that, but there is this really interesting thing that's happening where I've brought you on as a part of the team of coaches, and you have your own coaching business, and you received a client who heard about you through The Other Woman and the Wife. And so it's really interesting watching this entanglement kind of take place. Yeah. Yeah. So that's cool.
Enjoy.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this podcast episode. We appreciate your support and would love to hear your thoughts on it. If you've made it this far, you're likely someone who is invested in the journey of being the other woman. We understand that this can be a difficult and complex experience, which is why we offer guided coaching to help you heal and move forward. We encourage you to explore the links in the episode description or visit theotherwomanandthewife.com/coaching to learn more about our exclusive coaching program and apply today. Thank you again for your support, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.